You're standing in line at a coffee shop on a Wednesday morning, and the guy in front of you is wearing sneakers that cost $400. You know this because you looked them up once, not because you wanted a pair, because you were curious about the kind of person who buys them. His jacket is a brand you recognize. His watch is the kind that shows up in ads between YouTube videos. He orders something complicated, something with oat milk and 2 extra shots, and he pays with a tap of his phone like the number doesn't matter. From the outside, this man looks like he has arrived. You are behind him in line, wearing a fleece you bought on clearance 3 winters ago. Your coffee order is black. It has been black for 11 years, because you decided a long time ago that the difference between black coffee and a complicated coffee, multiplied out over 11 years, is not a small number. The barista hands him his drink. He walks to a corner table, opens his laptop, and begins doing what people do when they want to look busy in public. You get your coffee, you find a seat near the window, and here is the part nobody in this coffee shop knows. You have just under $2 million sitting quietly across 4 different accounts and 3 assets that generate income every single month, whether you walk into this coffee shop or not. The guy in the $400 sneakers has $200 in his checking account. You know this, not because you looked, but because you used to be adjacent to that number. You know what $200 in a checking account feels like. You know the specific way a person holds their phone when they're checking a balance they're not sure about. He's holding his phone exactly that way right now. This story doesn't start with money. It starts with a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday. Not a Tuesday where anything significant happened. Just an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 3 years out of college, sitting in a studio apartment with a $54 salary and a feeling you couldn't name yet but recognized somewhere in your chest every time you checked your account. Not broke. That's the important word. Not broke. Just never as far ahead as the math should have allowed. You were doing everything correctly. Direct deposit every other Friday. Rent on the 1st. The credit card paid down to almost 0. And then slowly, quietly, not quite 0 again. The raise came. You did the math. That's real movement. And then 6 months later, you couldn't find it. Not wasted. Not blown on anything dramatic. Just absorbed. The way water absorbs into dry ground. Completely and without a trace. That Tuesday, you sat with a legal pad and a pen, and you wrote down every single dollar that had come into your life in the past 12 months. Then you wrote down where it went. The 2 columns didn't match the way they should have, and something about seeing that on paper, the actual architecture of your own financial life, laid out in 2 columns on a legal pad, did something to the way you looked at the next 11 years. His name was Jordan. You worked with Jordan for 2 years at the same marketing firm in Charlotte. Same floor, same open plan office, same Tuesday morning stand-ups where everyone talked about Q3 targets and nobody talked about what was actually happening in their bank accounts. Jordan was the kind of person who made the office feel like a performance space. New jacket every few weeks. Weekend stories that required an audience. A lease on a 2-bedroom downtown that he mentioned often enough that you memorized the monthly figure without trying. Jordan was also the kind of person who borrowed $20 for lunch with a casualness that told you everything about the space between his income and his actual financial position. You didn't judge him, you watched him, not with contempt, with the specific attention of someone trying to understand a pattern they don't want to repeat. Because the thing about Jordan was that he wasn't irresponsible, he was just playing a different game than he thought he was playing. He thought he was building a life that matched his income. What he was actually doing was building a performance of a life. And performances are expensive, and they require a continuously expanding budget to maintain the same effect. Every upgrade signals a new baseline. And once a baseline exists, going below it feels like failure. So the apartment stays, the lease renews, the jacket becomes necessary. The $400 sneakers become the kind of thing that happens on a slow Tuesday when the credit card has enough room and the algorithm knows exactly what you've been looking at. You saw all of this from your desk, 3 feet away, for 2 years. And then you made a decision that Jordan never knew about. You didn't announce it. You didn't tell anyone. You went home on a Wednesday evening, and you opened your HR portal, and you did 3 things. First, you increased your 401k contribution to capture the full company match. 4% of your salary, matched dollar for dollar. Free money sitting in a footnote of the benefits email that most people on your floor deleted without reading. Second, You opened a Roth IRA. You set up an automatic transfer of $200 every payday. 2 days after the direct deposit hit. Before you could see it. Before you could spend it. Before it became available to the version of you that might have a different idea about what to do with it. Third, and this is the one that changed the architecture of everything that came after, you opened a high-yield savings account and began building what you would later understand was not an emergency fund, but a deployment fund. Capital waiting for an opportunity that hadn't arrived yet. Nothing happened after that. No confirmation, no sign. No moment where the math became visible. Jordan got a new jacket in November. You drove home in the same 2016 Honda Civic you'd been driving for 3 years. There was a scratch on the passenger door from a parking garage incident in March that you kept meaning to handle and kept not handling. Nobody at the office noticed anything different about you. That was the point. The first asset wasn't glamorous. It was a storage facility. Not a large one, a small, 22-unit operation in a suburb outside of Greensboro that had been owned by a retired electrician named Paul for 19 years. Paul was 71. His knees were bad. His kids weren't interested. The books were functional but not organized. The cash flow was real. You found it through a business broker website you'd been checking every Sunday evening for 4 months. Most people scroll business listings the way other people scroll real estate they can't afford. With curiosity and no intention. You were scrolling with a spreadsheet open in the other tab. The asking price was $118,000. You offered $94,000. You met at $101,500 after 3 weeks of back and forth that Paul seemed to find mildly exhausting and you found clarifying. From your deployment fund. You financed the rest through a small business loan at a rate that made sense on paper and made more sense inside the cash flow model you'd built on a Saturday morning at your kitchen table. The first year, it netted $31,000. You told no one, not your parents, not the friends from college who were buying condos and posting about it, not Jordan, who by this point had moved on to a different company and a bigger apartment, and a lease on a vehicle that had a monthly payment you knew was straining something he'd never say out loud. You just sat with the $31,000 the way you'd sat with the $190 from the first test you ever ran. Not quite pride, not quite anything with a clean name. Just the quiet, specific satisfaction of a system running the way you built it to run. Then you used it. Here is what the next 4 years looked like from the outside. Nothing. Same car. Same apartment you eventually bought when the numbers made that decision obvious. 3-bedroom, quiet street. Bought it below market from an estate sale that required patience more than capital. Same fleece from the clearance rack. Same black coffee. From the outside, you looked like someone who was doing fine. Comfortable maybe. Mid-level. The kind of person who doesn't make anyone's radar. Here is what those 4 years looked like from the inside. The storage facility acquired a second facility. A third followed 18 months later. This one larger, in a corridor with strong occupancy trends and almost no direct competition within a 12-mile radius. You found it on a Tuesday. You closed on it 6 weeks later. You did not celebrate. The Roth IRA had been compounding quietly through all of it. The 401k match had been capturing free money every single pay period for 6 years without interruption. The index fund had done what index funds do. Nothing exciting, nothing dramatic, just forward, through every news cycle and every market correction and every Tuesday morning when the world seemed to be ending and then wasn't. Somewhere in year 5, a number appeared on your screen during a Sunday evening account review that made you read it twice. Your portfolio generated more last month than you contributed. Not from anything you did that month. Not from a decision or a phone call or a deal. Just from the compounding that had been running quietly in the background since the Wednesday evening you sat in your apartment with a legal pad and 2 columns that didn't match. The board was starting to play itself. There was a networking event in April. You went because someone you respected suggested it. And because occasionally, it is useful to be in a room with people you haven't met yet. The man you ended up near the drinks table with had a way of making his financial position the weather of every conversation. Not aggressive about it. Subtle. The kind of subtle that requires practice. He mentioned a property he'd just acquired. He mentioned a trip. He mentioned his accountant in the way some people mention their accountant when what they're actually doing is establishing that they have one. He asked what you did. You told him you owned some storage facilities and a few other things. You watched his face run the familiar calculation. The car you drove there, the watch that tells time and does nothing else. the storage facilities. He smiled the specific smile of someone who has already moved on mentally while their face catches up. Good? You have learned to read that smile the way a chess player reads a position 3 moves ahead. The moment someone underestimates you, they stop watching you. The moment they stop watching you, you can do exactly what you want. The ordinary life is armor, and you wear it not out of humility, but out of strategy. It costs almost nothing to maintain, and it returns something money genuinely cannot purchase. The freedom to operate without being perceived as a target. You got a glass of water, spoke to 2 people you actually wanted to speak to, and left before 8:30. The stress test arrived on a Thursday morning in February. Not a financial crisis, something quieter and harder. Your phone rang at 6:47 a.m., and the call was from your father's cell phone, but it was your mother's voice, and there was a quality to the silence before she spoke that told you everything before any words did. You were in the air by 10:15. Not the cheapest flight. The next one. You didn't check your account before booking it. The thought didn't occur to you. You sat in a hospital waiting room in St. Louis for 4 days under fluorescent lighting that hummed at a frequency specifically designed to make time feel both suspended and infinite. You were completely present. The logistics didn't touch you. The money handled every problem that money could handle and asked nothing from you in return. During the 4 days you needed to be somewhere that had nothing to do with money. This is the thing nobody puts in the financial content. Not the net worth number, not the passive income figure, not the compound growth chart. The specific freedom of being able to show up completely when it matters, because the floor you built across 1,000 ordinary Wednesdays held. Your father came home 8 days later. You drove back through weather that had turned strange and gray, and you sat in your car in the parking garage of your storage facility, and you looked at the concrete wall in front of you for a while. You thought about Jordan. You thought about the guy in the $400 sneakers. You thought about every version of a person who is one unexpected Thursday away from a decision they can't afford to make correctly, and you felt something that wasn't pride and wasn't relief. It was something quieter than both. The specific feeling of a floor holding. The number crossed $2 million on a Wednesday. You were in your car eating a sandwich in the parking lot of your second storage facility because the property manager had a question about a drainage issue on the east side of the lot, and you'd driven out to look at it yourself. You weren't checking your accounts. You were checking the weather, because the drainage issue was going to matter more if it rained Thursday. The quarterly summary from your accountant arrived as a notification while your phone was already open. You read the top line. You read it again. The drainage issue still needed attention. You sent the property manager a text. You finished your sandwich. Then you sat there in the parking lot for a few minutes, with the engine running, and thought about the Tuesday you sat with a legal pad and 2 columns that didn't match. You thought about how the version of you on that Tuesday could not have imagined this parking lot. Not because the number was unimaginable, but because the path was invisible. Because nobody had shown you that the path existed. Because everything around you was pointing at the performance of wealth, and nobody was talking about the architecture of it. The guy in the coffee shop with the $400 sneakers isn't stupid. He isn't lazy. He's just playing the visible game, the one everyone can see, the one that rewards the appearance of arrival over the actual accumulation of ground. You played that game for about 6 months after your first real paycheck. Then you sat down with a legal pad and 2 columns, and you chose a different game entirely. Here's what $2 million feels like on a Wednesday afternoon. It feels like a parking lot. It feels like a sandwich from the deli on Route 9 that cost $8 and tastes the same as it did when you had $200 in your checking account and a scratch on your car door you couldn't afford to fix. It feels like a drainage issue that needs attention before Thursday's rain. It feels like absolutely nothing has changed on the outside, because nothing has. The car is newer than Jordan's last car, but older than what most people on your income would drive. The watch still only tells time. The fleece is a different color but the same brand. Same clearance rack logic. What's different is underneath. What's different is the floor. And the floor doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up in a parking garage on a Monday morning. It doesn't appear in the coffee shop, or at the networking event, or in any of the rooms where the visible game is being played loudly and at considerable expense. It just holds. When the Thursday comes, and the Thursday always comes, it just holds. This week, pay attention to where the visible game is asking you to spend money you haven't decided to spend. The upgrade that would feel like proof. The purchase that would look like arrival. The sneakers that cost $400 and say something you want people to hear. Feel the pull. Recognize the pull for what it is. And then ask yourself one question. Not whether you can afford it. Whether the version of you sitting in a parking lot on a Wednesday 11 years from now will be grateful you made it. Because that version of you is being built right now. On an ordinary Wednesday. While nobody is watching.